Hello, welcome to our series about Jewish deaf authors. I'm Brianne Berger. It is an honor to be here with Dr. Irene W. Leigh. She's a Professor Emerita of Psychology at Gallaudet University. She has an impressive list of published works in academia. Her books focus on mental health, deaf identity, cochlear implants, other things. She also is a proud mother of Rabbi Darby Leigh and Serena Leigh Krombach. I'm really excited to interview with you and welcome you. Thank you for being here with us.
I'm really thrilled to be with you all and get the chance to talk about my life. Anyway, the reason for the W is because my maiden name was Wolf. I kept the W in honor of my parents because I owe them everything. They made me who I am today. Anyway, I'm excited to be here and to go through the questions from Brianne.
Thank you for giving us time to learn about you. It's worth documenting everything you've done, and you're so humble. You've done so much. I appreciate you sharing with your wisdom with us. The first question, I'd love for you to share with us about your books. I think it was like 8 or 9 different books.
Let's go back to my first book. I'll explain later how the whole thing started. My first book is titled Psychotherapy with Deaf Clients from Diverse Groups. That was published in 1999, and at the time, there was nothing written about mental health for deaf people from different groups. Nothing at all. So that was my first book. And after that, I delved into the subject of cochlear implant. I would use this sign for cochlear implant because it looks more like a magnet. Many deaf people would use the different cochlear implant sign that has more of a negative connotation. They hated the cochlear implant. I talked to different kinds of people about the meaning of that sign. Some were visibly disgusted by the cochlear implant, while others preferred to be neutral. My job as a researcher is to be neutral, so therefore I sign it this way. Anyway, I met up with a colleague of mine, John, Dr. John Christensen. He's a sociologist and I'm a psychologist. Both of us were curious about the cochlear implant and how deaf people protest and rebel against it. They would threaten parents. Parents would get upset and be confused about what to do regarding the cochlear implant. In the 90s, children were getting implanted and they were too young to express their feelings. So the two of us, John and I, decided to interview parents and collect records. We worked with Gallaudet Research Institute and gathered information about parents' perceptions from questionnaires. We merged all the information into a book called Cochlear Implants in Children, Ethics and Choices. It was a very, very popular book. Later, I wrote another edited book with another colleague of mine, Raylene Pludnevicini. Both of us decided to write a book with chapters about different perspectives relating to the cochlear implant. We researched things like that. So I wrote 2 cochlear implant books. After that, I was interested in the subject of deaf identity. What does that mean? Who am I as a deaf person? How did I grow up as a deaf person? How did I get comfortable with myself as a deaf person? I never wanted to be hearing. I thought I should write a book about that. So I decided to go ahead and write about it. It was published in 2009 and it is still selling. Another book I wrote is with another colleague of mine. Yes, I worked with lots of different colleagues. Teamwork, you know? Anyway, her name is Catherine O'Brien. Both of us co-edited a book called Deaf Identities, with chapters from different authors sharing their perspective of deaf identities. Not just mine from my first book, which I did alone, but this was shared with many different perspectives, including one chapter that was written by my son, Rabbi Darby Leigh. He worked with a Protestant pastor or preacher, I'm not sure which one. He wrote about religious faith with deaf identities. It was interesting. So that was 2 Deaf Identities books published. And then after that, I wrote Deaf People and Society. It's more of a college textbook through Allen and Bacon. It was a big publishing company, and then later it was switched to another publishing company. I'll explain more about the publishing companies later. Different publishing companies were begging for a deaf culture-related book. So we wrote a deaf culture book with 2 other colleagues. Now there is a 3rd edition with 3 colleagues. Plus the book Deaf People and Society is going through a 2nd edition. Wait, I'm mixing it up. It's going through a 3rd edition. The Deaf Culture book is going through the 2nd edition. Deaf People and Society is going through a 3rd. I'm so sorry I got confused because there's so many books. Those are college-level textbooks. Deaf People and Society, I'm working on the 3rd edition right now with 3 other colleagues. So that's my long answer to your question.
Thank you. You are a busy woman.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing about that. It's really important to think about different things like signs of cochlear implants. Identities are so important. Today, people are still debating on what it means. The book about identities, I think I need to find one of those. I read a few, but it's not the one, so I'll have to look for it. I'm putting on my list to read later, so tell me about your inspiration for writing those books. Do you believe your Jewish faith or being deaf plays a role in your motivation to write?
Okay, interesting. When I get your question, I started thinking about how I got inspired. Really, I have to go back to my childhood. My parents were my finger spelling is impossible. Refugees from Nazi Germany. I was born in London, England. My parents found out I was deaf when I was 2. They decided it was important to make sure I could be independent. My parents were well educated, so therefore they always explained what was going on to me. They instilled a love for learning in me. They taught me to be the best I can be. That is all a part of the Jewish tradition. Having intellectual discussions, they included me in their discussions, and they would interpret television programs. When I was growing up, there were no closed captions. No interpreting offered on TV, nothing.
They interpreted?
Not interpreted, explained. They explained more than interpreted. When they explained, I listened and learned. In school, they encouraged me to be the best I could be. They also encouraged me to do a lot of reading. I grew up loving books. I would go to the library and collect stacks of books to bring home and read. Then I would bring it back and get more books and read. I kept doing that. So from that, I learned the structure of the English language. Plus, in school, we wrote stories. Then in high school, I wrote essays. In college, I learned how to be a good writer. Then, when I started my professional life, people would ask me to write articles, so I kept writing and writing. So from there, that's how I grew into becoming an author. Really, the most important inspiration came from my being deaf. I wanted to show the world that deaf people can do a lot of things, that there are many different ways to be deaf. I wanted to explain what deaf people are about. I'm deaf myself, and there were some challenges where I wasn't treated equally. That people would sometimes, well, I can tell a few stories, but we can shelf that for now. Anyway, I wanted to show that I can write. I can produce published works. I can, yes. That's where the inspiration came from.
That's amazing. I saw an available niche market and decided to fulfill that and make your history yourself.
Definitely. It's important to realize that when I was in college, I was in the deaf education program. For the first time, I was assigned a reading list. I found one deaf author that was a counselor, Gino Vescovi. I was shocked to find a deaf person that wrote a book. I had no idea about deaf people writing. Deaf professionals writing, nothing. That was in college in the 1960s. That gives you an idea of how old I am now. If you do the math, if you're good at math, you can figure it out. So it was the 1960s. I wondered, where are the deaf writers? The professional writers. It wasn't until the 1990s that I saw an influx of deaf writers popping up. Now there's many, many deaf writers. It's wonderful now. It's a big difference now. But that was a reason for me to write, to say that deaf can write.
What's one lesson you'd want people to learn from a book? What is the one crucial thing you'd want them to learn?
I want them to learn that there are many, many different ways to be deaf. There are deaf challenges, yes, but with hearing people, they all have challenges as well. Being deaf is our unique challenge. For some deaf people, it's not a big deal and they find it easy. Others really struggle with it, and then there's everything in between. There are different ways to confront, deal with it, explain, and understand. Even if you have the cochlear implant, what does it mean to be a deaf person with the cochlear implant? And do they sign with the cochlear implant, or do they talk only, or do they do both? Are they bilingual? Whatever. If you're African American or an indigenous person or Asian American or Latino. The deaf people in those cultures, what are your different life experiences? How do you face life? If you're gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual, or queer, whatever you want to call yourself, what does it mean, and how does that merge with your deaf identity? Things like that. There are different things. How does it impact the families? How do they confront and deal with it? How did the schools approach and deal with it? What about the school's leadership and how they frame the issue? How did they help the children grow and really achieve their full potential? So that is what I want people to get from the books that I've written and worked on.
Beautiful. Thank you. So I'm curious, with your published books, do you have any advice or can you share your experience on how you got published so other Jewish deaf writers can learn from you? Do you have any advice for them?
Really, you have to understand the publishing process before you start so you'd know what you're getting into. For example, I'd like to go back to the history of my books. My first one, Psychotherapy with Deaf Clients from Diverse Groups. Like I said, there was nothing written about how to provide therapy for deaf clients in many diverse groups. There was nothing. So I had an idea. I remember I was laying on my bed and thinking about what to do. I was a professor at Gallaudet and I wanted to get a tenure. To get tenure, you'd have to have scholarship records. I had already written articles, but it wasn't enough. I really wanted to get the records, so I thought about it. I thought, I could write a book. Where do I start? I started thinking really hard about it and thought, well, I work at Gallaudet, and Gallaudet has a university press publisher right there. I connected with them and told them I was interested. They told me to write a proposal and that all publishing press has guidelines on how to submit a proposal, bio, or CV, curriculum vitae of your works. And then you have to propose an explanation of the abstract. Details like chapter 1 is about what, chapter 2 is what, and so on. And why are you qualified to write about this subject? What experience did you have to write this book? You have to explain all of that. I started with Gallaudet University Press and gave them my proposal. Academia and publishing companies have boards that will review the books. And then give approval to go ahead and publish the book. Or they'll tell you they're not sure about the book or they're not happy with the book. I waited a long time for Gallaudet to go through it with the board's approval. And they told me to go ahead and start writing that book. And then my second book about cochlear implants in children, I thought I would use Gallaudet again. It's the best in the same place. Then when I started thinking about deaf identities, I was curious and decided to venture out to a different publisher. I was curious what it was like. So I contacted a good colleague of mine from RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology. Their National Technical Institute for the Deaf, NTID. I contacted him and he was one of the editors of a series about perspective of deafness that was published through Oxford University Press. I contacted him and asked him if he thought it was worth my time to write about deaf identities. Was it worth creating a proposal to Oxford University Press? He told me, sure, go ahead, go for it, yes. So I learned what their guidelines were to submit a proposal and they accepted it.
Wow.
The publisher that...
Oxford is impressive.
Yes. And then the book after that was published by Oxford University Press as well. And then I got curious about textbooks. I haven't written any textbooks yet, so I contacted Allen and Bacon, which is a huge publishing company that also publishes a lot of academic books. So I submitted a proposal to them. I waited and waited, and then they accepted it. So I've worked with Gallaudet University Press, Oxford University Press, and then Allen and Bacon. And then Plural and Routledge. I got different experiences and different royalties. Like different payments, of course, there were different processes. That's my explanation of how I went through the publishing process. It's important that if you are curious about writing, you must go to the publishing company's websites where they talk about authors. And there, it'll explain everything about how to submit a proposal.
That's a very interesting experience you went through. It's well-rounded and well-known. That's really a rich experience for sure. There's a lot to share.
Yes, definitely.
I wish we could go on with more questions, but I think I need to close the interview. Do you have any last words for our audience?
If you feel the urge to write, go for it. If you're anxious, not sure, or comfortable with your writing in English, get an editor. There are many editors that can help you with your writing in English. If you feel like you have a message you want to share with the world, go for it. I was scared and wasn't sure if I could write my first book. Don't be afraid of the challenge. Sometimes you'll have to write over and over again, doing it over and over again until you get the right draft to show people that it is worth publishing. I take a month to write a chapter because I'm always considering the right wording, what ideas am I trying to convey to the table, that kind of thing. Don't let anything stop you if you find that you have the urge to write. That is important.
Thank you so much. I was really looking forward to this. This interview inspired me to definitely put down your book on deaf identities on my list. I'm curious about some of the others too. 2 or 3 of your books I've already read, but I need to read more. I didn't realize you have 8 or 9 books. That's amazing. Really, thank you for your contribution to the deaf community and deaf history. This is the history that you made for us, so thank you.
Thank you for your beautiful words. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk about myself.
You deserve it. Wow, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.